Over the years, Resident Evil has gone back and forth between a fixed camera view and a first-person view, as if going through a little identity crisis. The devs thought fixed camera was the way to go, since it did so well in 1996. But it turned out that was not the case. As we saw, low sales from RE Remake and Zero proved that the new generation had a different taste. So what's the solution? Well, why not combine the two perspectives? Can't go wrong with that, right? Surprisingly, what sparked the creation of this title was actually more of a legal issue. You see, at the time, Nintendo held exclusive rights to Capcom's main Resident Evil games, like Remake, Zero, and eventually RE4. The PS2, on the other hand, was selling like hotcakes, so it's no doubt Capcom was itching to get their games on it, and being tied down by Nintendo did not help the situation. In the end, they had no choice but to create a spin-off for the PS2.
A scared little rat with an ugly, useless gun.
The game was released in June of 2003 called Resident Evil Dead Aim. Following the leak of the T-Virus and the destruction of Raccoon City, Umbrella still carried on with their experiments. Unfortunately, a large amount of the virus was stolen on an ocean liner. Sent by the government, Bruce McGivern was tasked to take back the cruiser and stop the virus. Interesting enough, the scenario was going to be quite different during a big part of the development, but was changed last second. If you think about it, Dead Aim is actually quite important for a spin-off. It was a way for the devs to experiment with a new gameplay style. Well, how did it turn out? First off, the way it worked was, whenever you aimed your gun, the game would transition into first-person view. Everything else was third-person. Sounds interesting, right? Unfortunately, no. The controls feel clunky due to the fact that both camera rotation and movement are mapped to the same joystick. Now, I don't understand why the devs couldn't just follow games with good controls already on the market, like SOCOM. On top of that, if you don't have the GunCon 2, aiming is quite a chore. Not that it doesn't work with the joystick, but it's a lot less intuitive. Well, I guess at least the title wasn't a lie. On a better note, the atmosphere was pretty well done. You can find bodies hanging in bathrooms and random zombies popping out at you. Unfortunately, the entire game consists of only 3 characters, which is very, very little. Cheesy dialogue and subtitles that don't match the voice does not help either.
Fast.
As you've just heard from Patricia, Dead Aim turned out to be a mixed bag. So where is the franchise headed next? Well, with the internet boom right at our doorsteps, I think we have our answer. But first, let's see where it all began. Back in the era of the N64 and PlayStation, high-speed internet was a luxury, something not available to many households. For myself and many others, dial-up internet was all we got. It let you browse websites, download some music, and that's about it. You want to download a video? Sure, it'll be ready in a few weeks. It wasn't until the turn of the millennium, when broadband internet was becoming more and more accessible, that we started seeing it creep into the mainstream. Coincidentally, this was also when the 6th generation consoles were coming. Sega's very own Dreamcast was the first to have a built-in modem. During this time, many people were bugging Mikami with statements like, "Online Resident Evil, we want an online Resident Evil." Though of course, Mikami and Capcom knew they had to proceed carefully if they were going to do this. It was new technology after all. In the end, the decision was to wait and observe how other online games will do first. Taking inspiration from Sega's network arcade game Spike Out, producer Noritaka Funamizu began development for an online RE title. Funamizu was very open to feedback from his colleagues. One thing he recalls hearing a lot was how hard it would be to create a multiplayer Resident Evil, since many felt the franchise was only scary when played alone. Because of this, Funamizu decided to make a multiplayer demo to test the waters. What he observed was nothing short of pure human nature. Players proceeded very carefully, as they would for any RE game. But surprisingly, when they saw a zombie roughing up a fellow player, a majority of them hesitated to help, thinking, "I need to conserve my ammo, so why should I help you?" Funamizu took these behavior results and decided to create different character classes, so that whatever the player's personality may be, there would be a role that fit them. The game was released in March of 2004 called
Resident Evil Outbreak.
Now, if you're looking for a multiplayer survival horror game back in the mid-2000s, this was it. Traditional fixed camera, limited ammo, online co-op, what more could you ask for? Up to 4 players could play at once, and the goal was to utilize each character's special abilities, work together, and survive the outbreak. Now, you'd expect there to be a voice chat so players could strategize, but unfortunately, there was none. The reason? Trolls. Funamizu felt the atmosphere him and his team worked so hard to create would be destroyed if the players started saying stupid things during online play. Instead, each character was assigned short phrases in which the player could trigger at any time. Keyword here, any time. Yes, the absence of voice chat does eliminate trolls, but that doesn't mean these said trolls can't button spam.
Come on!
Aside from this little issue, Outbreak was a decent shot at co-op survival horror. Most importantly, it preserved the classic Resident Evil feel. 1 year later, a sequel to Outbreak was released called Resident Evil Outbreak File 2. It features new scenarios, but the gameplay is exactly the same. In fact, many criticism were given because it felt more like an expansion pack rather than a sequel, which I feel is quite true. But at least you get to duke it out with the zombie elephant.
Hideki Kamiya, mastermind behind titles like Beautiful Joe, Okami, Bayonetta, Wonderful 101, and more. Notice how these games have one thing in common? Action. Ever since his initial role as director for Resident Evil 2, Kamiya has always tried to steer the franchise towards a more action-based game with epic cinematics. That was his style. With the success of RE2, he was more than convinced this was the way to go for the next main entry. Focusing purely on style and coolness. The game was going to be about a protagonist named Tony who had superhuman abilities with the help of biotechnology. Superhuman. Yeah. That did not sit well with Mikami at all. It was shifting towards action and less survival horror. Hence, the half-finished game ended up giving birth to a new franchise. As for RE4, back to the drawing board. It wasn't until the Tokyo Game Show in 2002 where we saw a completely new version, which was announced as a GameCube exclusive, dubbed the Castle version. This prototype featured Leon S. Kennedy infiltrating a huge castle belonging to Oswald E. Spencer. The plot appeared to revolve around Leon trying to eradicate the progenitor virus, while fighting an infection inside his own body. According to the producer, Hiroyuki Kobayashi, this infection gave Leon some sort of special power in his left hand, which players could slowly unravel as the plot progressed. This would have been pretty interesting to see, but it never made it into Resident Evil 4. This prototype was eventually scrapped as well, due to drastic gameplay changes such as segments that featured FPS controls. A new build was revealed in E3 of 2003, codenamed Hallucination Biohazard 4. Leon was pitted against a handful of new enemies, most of which were supernatural, such as a ghost with an enormous hook, suits of empty armor, and creepy little dolls. Though there is one big giveaway which hints that these encounters were all made up in Leon's head, and that be the blue screen transitions, which were probably caused by the effects of his virus infection. Nonetheless, these segments look like they would have kept us at the edge of our seats. Even Shinji Mikami himself warned the viewers to not pee their pants prior to watching the trailer footage. Unfortunately, as great as this version was turning out to be, everything started to crumble shortly after. The culprit being poor budgeting. Development costs got out of hand, and the project was scrapped yet again. One last attempt was made following this cancellation. The team tried to take things back to the roots by featuring classic zombies from the past RE titles. But as you can guess, that idea ended up down the drain as well. Mikami and his team were going through quite a creative block, undecided on what to do. Either way, they needed to put their heads together, cause time and money were dwindling. One thing the team could agree on was creating something fresh for players, while still keeping the game as scary as the past titles. During this time, Mikami was playing Onimusha 3 for fun. The game was good, he thought. But it could have been even better if the camera was behind the player. And history was made that day. Goodbye classic Resident Evil fixed camera view. Hello over-the-shoulder view. But it didn't end there. Wanting to enhance the fear factor, Mikami decided to make the AI smarter to give the player a harder time. But of course, zombies are brain dead. Literally. So what to do? The answer was humans. Infected humans. Now he could make enemies cooperate, dodge, and attack a little more strategically. Mikami knew fans would be shocked at first. I mean, no zombies? No fixed camera? What, was this even Resident Evil? But he had confidence it was a quality game. Well, let's see how it turned out.
You alright?
I'm fine! Leave me alone!
The game was released in January of 2005, called
Resident Evil 4.
Following the events of RE2, Leon has been training as a secret agent under the US government for the past 6 years. He now finds himself in a rural area somewhere in Europe, tasked to rescue the president's daughter, Ashley. So here we are, at the turning point of the series. RE4 was a wild success. Millions of copies flew off the shelves within a month. Everything Mikami had wished for came true. No doubt the game is very different. No longer is the emphasis placed on fearing when the next zombie might creep around the corner. Rather, it's about how accurate your aim is and how well you can optimize your weapon upgrades. This brought in a slew of new players into the franchise. At the same time, RE4 didn't leave the old school fans in the dust. The overall atmosphere of the game was still creepy. There were a number of enemies that could still keep you at the edge of your seat, namely the Regenerator. It was the perfect balance of action and survival horror, mixed in with an interesting plot, engaging characters, and rich atmosphere.
Where's the satisfying sound of one's impalement?
The devs has always looked at cutscenes as sort of a tension reliever for players. But this time around, they didn't want to give us any relief, all thanks to QuickTime events. I felt it was a great addition though. They weren't littered throughout the game, and when it did happen, it was very well executed. QuickTime events stuck with the franchise from here on out, and let's just say the devs got a bit too happy with it down the road, but that'll be a story for another day. One aspect which I can confidently say RE4 did better was the slot management system. Items weren't single units anymore. Suddenly, size mattered, and item management felt like a mini puzzle game of its own. Overall, the game is nowhere near as hard as its predecessors. In fact, Mikami made a conscious choice during development to tone down the difficulty by constantly reminding his team, you don't have to give players such a hard time. I'm guessing this was to welcome new players into the franchise who weren't used to the punishing gameplay signature to the earlier RE titles. It's incredible how influential Resident Evil 4 was, not only to the survival horror genre, but also the third-person shooter genre as a whole. Popular titles like Gears of War, Batman Arkham Asylum, and Dead Space had many gameplay elements that were inspired by what was accomplished in RE4. Unfortunately, this is the last we'll be seeing Mikami alongside Resident Evil. He left Capcom shortly after and eventually started his own development company called Tango Gameworks. His vision was to empower young creators because he felt they were more in sync with gamers in this generation, compared to old-time developers who were too stubborn to change their views. In the next episode, we'll see how Capcom and the Resident Evil franchise will proceed without its original creator. Will it succeed, or will it crash and burn? Stay tuned, and we'll see you next time.